All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge with respect the Indigenous peoples and communities whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day and on whose traditional territories our work takes place. My name is Autumn Sipis. I am the project manager for the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare. And on behalf of the coalition, I would like to welcome you to today's training event, RETScreen Expert, a comprehensive energy and carbon management tool. This event is being delivered as part of the coalition's Preparing Canada's Healthcare Buildings for Net Zero project, made possible with an investment from the Government of Canada's Low Carbon Economy Implementation Readiness Fund. Throughout the event, please use the chat function for any technical issues you may be experiencing. Use the Q&A function for any questions you have regarding the presentation, and our panelists will be answering questions at the end of the event today. Here's a slide where you can see where all those things are. We will also be recording this presentation. The recording will be sent to all registrants and be available on our website and YouTube channel at a later time. I would now like to welcome Stephen Dixon. Stephen is the principal of TDS Dixon Inc. He has over 44 years provided energy management services to a diverse range of industrial, commercial, institutional, and utility organizations. Broadly recognized as a leader in energy management training, his focus is simple: to empower all that he works with to use energy more effectively by developing individual skills, organizational best practices, and providing tools for energy management. Take it away, Stephen.
Thank you, Autumn. Make sure everybody can see my screen. That's great. We're going to have a quick little tour of RETScreen today, maybe highlight a couple of the new interesting features that have come along recently. For those that have seen RETScreen before, for those that haven't, I'm also going to deliver this as if you don't know what RETScreen is all about. So RETScreen is a pretty powerful tool. I've used it. I've been involved with RETScreen for over 20 years. I'm not a developer per se, but I have contributed to the development, as have maybe over 500 other technical people across this country and across the world for that matter. And it's proudly a Canadian tool, which is really good. So RETScreen is used in many, many different parts of the world beyond Canada. It's available in 38 and counting different languages, which covers almost 2/3 of the world's population. And it's a tool that's really designed to help you to make good decisions around energy, and also not just energy, but carbon, sustainability in general, and to be able to track the performance of the impact of those decisions. So over time, being able to see whether you've actually made a difference. And that's what's most important here, is we do make a difference. RETScreen has worked with a number of different partners the world over to either secure funding or technical input. For example, Natural Resources Canada is obviously the sort of the parent of RETScreen, provided a lot of funding along with IESO here in Canada, and NASA in the US have provided technical support in the form of a climate and weather database, which is accessible within the tool. So utilizing a lot of resources from around the world. RETScreen, and I'm going to go through pretty much all of these features today in an overview fashion. RETScreen is a tool that allows you to do a number of things when it comes to energy and carbon, for that matter. And then when I talk, I'm an energy guy. I've been an energy guy since 1981. So I've always sort of focused on energy, and knowing that if I focus on the consumption, I can impact the cost, and I can impact the carbon. When I started out, we didn't even think about carbon, right? And it just wasn't on the horizon. But dollars always were for organizations. So I always keep in mind that if we do something properly when it comes to energy efficiency, we will have a positive impact financially and a positive impact from a carbon point of view as well. So RETScreen provides tools to be able to do this. One of them, which is highlighted in the description you saw today that attracted you here, called the Virtual Energy Analyzer. It's a tool that allows you to sort of open up a building and see a complete building without actually even going to a building. Now, is it your building? No, but it's a building that could be very similar to your building. It allows you to go, what if I do this? What if I do that? What could happen in my building? Maybe you could be inspired to then gather some data for your building, or work with an organization or a provider that can use RETScreen or other tools to actually determine whether those measures are truly valuable in your building. the virtual energy analyzer. And it's also the basis for the net zero planning tool, which I'll highlight towards the end of this webinar as well, which is a tool that allows you to sort of lay out a plan for getting to net zero, meaning, what are we going to do stage by stage, step by step, in order to get to that zero carbon impact. Benchmarking, right? Many of you probably will use or may use Portfolio Manager to do that and other tools. RETScreen does have benchmarking tools, and I'll feature today some of the ways that RETScreen can interact with Portfolio Manager to do things that Portfolio Manager can't do, go well beyond what Portfolio Manager does as a benchmarking tool, but also to make sure your data in Portfolio Manager is properly backed up. I'll explain that one a little bit later. Feasibility analysis, that's where you say, what if I change this to that? What if I change this light bulb to that one? What if I change the schedules in this room to that? What if I change that rooftop unit on that small clinic to an air source heat pump rooftop unit? I can analyze the energy impact, the emissions, the financial impact, and I can even look at the sensitivity and the risk in doing that project if there's enough capital involved to want to look at it that way. Performance analysis, that's where we say, hey, we've done something, what did it say? In fact, I would say every building needs to track their performance on an ongoing basis, regardless of whether you've taken actions or not. To me, it's really important that you understand how your performance is changing or being maintained over time. Could get worse, could get better. You need to be on top of it. Some people call this monitoring and targeting reporting. Some people call it measurement verification for projects. RETScreen has a solid toolkit when it comes to actually doing that. I'll demonstrate some of those pieces. If you have more than one facility, then RETScreen has a portfolio tool, which allows you to en masse then work with a portfolio or a group of facilities. You can actually divide your facility. If you have a large one, like many healthcare facilities are quite large, you could break it down, especially if you had sub-metering when you're within your facility, you could break it down and use a portfolio to look at, different aspects of a facility or different parts of a facility. So a very powerful tool, and it actually works very well with Portfolio Manager, as I'll explain a little bit later. I'll actually feature, before we get to the end of this, a picture which shows you how RETScreen interacts with the world out there. It can interact with other tools like Portfolio Manager, many other software packages available commercially. It can interact with utility data. It can interact with meters in your building, right? And then it can produce output in many different forms for you, which some of them which are hit a button and get a result, or other ones which are completely customizable. You can create dashboards for it. RETScreen can work with many different project types. A lot of people say, well, can I do this? It's really just a matter of trying to figure out how to use the tools with RETScreen. There are very few projects that I find over the years you can't do with RETScreen. Now, it may depend on how deep you want to go. So maybe I simply want to assess the sort of the first pass pre-feasibility of the project. There's probably tools to do that. Then I maybe would hand it off to another person or another tool to actually go deeper. But in many cases, you can go deeper with RETScreen. So you can do the benchmarking, the pre-feasibility, feasibility, and even the implementation, and then the performance or the monitoring and tracking of that project over time. So many facilities can be tracked. But virtually every different type of system in a healthcare facility is something that you can look at quite closely. There are lots of internal databases to make your life easier. There's product databases with equipment and performance characteristics of that. There's cost of those things. So if you're doing a project, what if I change this to that? Oh, I'm going to pull up a ground source heat pump, an air source heat pump. There are ways to cost that within the tool. You eventually want to go out and get it costed properly, with cost estimates, engineering, and so on. But to begin with, to get that first pass, does it make sense to do this? A lot of the data is already in RETScreen. Climate data, how cold, how warm it is outside, the external conditions on a long-term basis, right, which we use for feasibility. Weather data, which is what we use for tracking actual performance month over month. If you're into water power, there's also hydrology data in there. Likely you won't be touching this in a healthcare facility, but it is there. Project data, so there's lots of archetypes, which are things, these buildings I talked about in the virtual energy analyzer. I'll highlight those in a few minutes. Case studies and templates. There's usually an example of how to do almost anything in there. You just have to dig around and find it. Benchmark data, right? Either modeled or monitored. And then resource maps. Again, you may not be doing wind at your site, but there are resource maps. You'll definitely want to look at solar, and RETScreen's links to the real-time NASA database for weather will actually help you quite nicely. So lots of resources. RETScreen wants to make itself, and has, I think, successfully made itself the hub as a tool, right? And bring lots of different things together. So it is a big toolkit. There's a lot of stuff in here. If I had more time, I would spend some time with it. Now, how can you take a quick look? How can you have a look at RETScreen? Just kind of look at some of the things I'm going to talk about today. Well, you don't even have to spend a cent to do that. You can go to the RETScreen website. Autumn, you'll be sending some links out afterwards if you don't know where to go, www.retscreen.net. You can download a copy of the latest version of the software. We're up to 9.3 now. And you can play with it. Now, will you be able to save? No, right? Will you see all the detailed features? Not necessarily, but you'll see enough that I think you can get a sense of whether it's useful to you. On top of that, Autumn will be sending you a 30-day license for the professional version, which means everything is enabled, right? You get a chance to play with it, look at it, see what you think, and make a decision as whether you want to buy it, right? So, and basically the purchase is about $860 a year subscription, and it can be used by multiple people in your organization or across multiple sites if you've got multiple buildings or sites within a healthcare network. So it can be used in that sense, and those arrangements you can make with REDScreen. All right, lots of learning resources built in. Case studies and templates. There's a place on the main screen down here. It says case studies and templates. You click into there, and you get a list of case studies. You can a little search bar. You can search case studies, which are real projects implemented with REDScreen, or templates, which are examples of things that maybe we didn't find a real project for, but we created a hypothetical example for. One of those on the right-hand side. A feasibility template for putting a variable speed or variable frequency drive on a fan in an HVAC system. So lots of learning resources embedded within the tool. Contextual learning or help resources, both textual within context, right? So you click on a title like capacity of a system. What does it want there? Well, it gives you a description of what it wants and may even give you some more details around a picture or a schematic or something like that. What's really cool about this tool is it also has video links here. So REDScreen maintains a e-learning channel on YouTube, and they have hundreds, likely hundreds. I don't think there are thousands yet, but they're definitely in the hundreds of videos on there. And many of those, either short or long, are linked within the software. So if you're within context and you want to understand how to analyze a pump in REDScreen, you click that, and yours truly pops up on your screen and gives you a little bit of a run through on how to use that tool, what to fill in, and so on. So there's some great learning resources embedded online within the tool itself. The virtual energy analyzer is the way that I say get started. If you haven't used the tool before and you want to kind of look at this what if type of thing, basically open up the virtual energy analyzer, and if you have once you open up a copy of REDScreen, I'm just going to go back to it here, you go to your main screen, right? And right at the top of the second column here in red, it says virtual energy analyzer. So you click into that and you say, what kind of facility do I want to look at? Well, if you're in healthcare, obviously you're in an institutional sector. I can pick healthcare. I can pick any other thing, right? And I picked, because we were working the other day with a small clinic in Ontario. I was finding to click clinic outpatient. And I can put the, say I'm going to put this thing in where this clinic is, somewhere in Eastern Ontario here, roughly. Keep it anonymous. So here we have this is where we're going to pull the environmental, the climate data for this particular building. So now I'm going to open up this building. Now I can actually pick from two kinds of buildings here. Both of them are the clinic or outpatients, but one is a target of 30 to 40% energy reduction. The other one is an 80 to 90% carbon reduction. So you can look at examples of buildings that have been taken to either say 40% less energy or 90% less carbon. So these are what we call the archetypes. So as soon as I hit OK here, it's going to go ahead and construct the building. Do I want to say the changes? REDScreen's really good at not actually losing your data. As long as you say, yes, I want to save it when you want to save it. I don't need to save what I had in here, so I'm just going to load it up. And it will then load up the archetype, which is this prefabricated building for me, and the definition of the word archetype means something that's very typical. Typical is one thing, archetypical is very typical. So here we see all the climate data that REDScreen uses. Here we see a little bit of a description of the facility, its size, and benchmarking information. Here we see a breakdown of the facility, right, in terms of all the different areas of energy use, right? So let's say we were looking at the office and corridor HVAC system. So we can get into ventilation, and here's a specification of that system, right? So we've got a complete building here analyzed, the base case and the proposed case. So every one of these screens, if I click into the building envelope here, I have what's called the base case, the way it is today, and the proposed case, the way we propose it to be. So you can play with this and create projects that improve insulation level. In this case, we've increased the solar shading on this facility to reduce the heat gains in the summer from the sun. There's lots of really cool little things you can do to build out an improved or a proposed case situation. Once you've created your proposed case situation, you can look at the emissions reductions. So in this case, even though it's a 40% energy reduction, it also turns out it's almost a 50% carbon reduction. The green is the reduced carbon. And then we can do a very detailed financial analysis where we can do well beyond simple payback. And some of the projects we're getting into, simple payback really isn't the best way to evaluate them anymore. And that's where we use present value analysis, where we actually can calculate things like the internal rate of return or the net present value. Or the one I like is the savings to investment ratio. If the simple payback is how long you have to wait to get your money back, the savings to investment ratio, if I wait for the project life, which say could be 10, 15, in this case 20 years, how many more times as much money as I put into it do I get back, right? And the more you get back for what you put in, the better the project is. So it's got some great tools for being able to look at projects financially. And then there's a great reporting tool. There's a predefined reporting tool you can look at. So you can go in and take a look at this project in summary. Now, we don't have it defined here, but there's actually a custom dashboard tool you can use to create your own report, right down to laying out on the screen in any particular thing. So I just opened it up here, and I can go in here and I can grab anything from my analysis here. I'm just going to jump in here to data and my feasibility information, and I can pull the table of all the measures, drop it in here and expand it. And so here we see all the table of measures. So I can actually create a customized page and then a set of customized pages into a book, and I can assemble these things into notebooks as well. So I can use, it's very flexible reporting requirements, right? So RETScreen does not deal with harmful gases. It does deal with, just looking at the question here, it does deal with refrigerant gases. It allows you to do an inventory of refrigerant gases, but it doesn't, in fact, deal with the significant impacts that obviously anesthetics and other gases have on the environment. So is this just a model? Is there real data measurements input about, say, actual windows? This is just a model, okay? In the sense it's a, I guess you call it a hypothetical situation, but these are real things. So what we've done is in building these, I built a few of them, there's hundreds of them in here, but what they've done is they've taken a real building or a set of real buildings, they've looked at them, they've tried to sort of come up with a building that represents the best of the most, or if I put it that way, and they've used real values that are in here. So these are realistic values, okay, in terms of the actual archetype. So that's a quick tour of the archetype. I wasn't intended to do that, but I think it was useful. So again, if the first pass in, if you want to jump in, virtual energy analyzer, and go for it. You'll learn a lot about what RETScreen can do. All right. And you can use the archetypes by facility type, which is what I just did, or by measure. You can say, I want to do a particular measure. Maybe I want to do heat recovery on a boiler, right? And so you can go in and you can pick a particular project. So you don't just have to go give me a whole building. You can say, give me a system or a part of a building or part of a system as a project. And it describes the projects that are implemented there in quite a bit of detail. Very informative tool. It's an analysis tool, but it's also, to me, a learning tool. How to use RETScreen to do these things in different situations. All right. And there's a lot of detail in these things. We just looked at that. The outputs are all there. So either 40% energy or 80 to 90% carbon reduction, a very rich set of learning tools. All right, feasibility. So really that was feasibility, but I'm just going to go through and take a look at some of the things you can do in this feasibility, which is like, what if I change this to that? What if I change this hallway or corridor lighting to this corridor lighting? We know we can improve the conditions, but what happens to the lighting level in the facility? What's the energy impact? So this actually has a lighting level calculator built into it. And it also allows you to show the impact of the change in lighting on the heating and cooling systems in the building. So it deals with all those types of interactions if you build out the building around this thing. So you don't just do the measure in isolation. You could, or you could do the measure within the context of the building. And honestly, when we go to low carbon, we have to think about, as we take heat out of a building by putting more efficient lighting in, it takes heat out. There's not as much heat given off by those more efficient lights. We have a cooling positive impact, but we have a heating negative impact because now the building has to provide more heat by the conventional heating systems. So if we're trying to get to low carbon, lighting retrofits can actually work in the wrong direction depending on where we are in this country and the relative carbon impacts of electricity and the fuels that you're using. RETScreen deals with that quite effectively. You can look at things like schedules and temperatures, right? Understanding, throughout the facility here, we've got overall hospital, we've got operating rooms, kitchen, exhaust fans, and so on. So we can have schedules for very, very various different parts. There's actually no limit to the number of schedules we can use, and we can assign different elements of the building envelope. So we don't just have one building envelope. We can have building envelope for each section of the building. Right? You can actually just put all your windows in one building envelope, all your walls in another one. So RETScreen is very flexible in how you account for. And a lot of people will try to call this a simulation program. It's really an energy accounting program. It accounts for where the energy goes. It accounts for what can be improved by making changes in those areas. We can look at more detailed ventilation systems, right? We can look at the impact of upgrading dampers or adding heat recovery to a system. One of the projects that I like to do if I have more time in a webinar is to actually take a look at, actually run through an example like this. This is actually, if you go into the building envelope model in RETScreen and you click on I'm pretty sure if you click on the video help, you get a little video where we do this. So there's a little incentive to go and have a look. But basically, in about 5 minutes, you can actually calculate the savings for upgrading the roof insulation in the building when you're doing a roof upgrade, right? You could do it. And what I mean by that is if we're doing the insulation when we have to upgrade the roof anyway because of the life of the roof, then we don't have to bear the full cost of the insulation on the energy project, only the marginal cost of going to the better insulation. That was actually a little project that came out of a workshop I was doing years and years ago. And there was a gentleman in the workshop and he's on his phone at the back of the room and he says, Steve, you're talking about RETScreen. He says, I got my roofing contractor asking me right now whether I want to put 4 inches rather than 2 inches on the roof that he's redoing for us on the west wing of the building. He said, should I put the 4 inches on? He said, or could that software tell me whether there's any benefit? So we actually did the calculation in the room as he was on the phone with the contractor. I gave him the answer. He bargained a bit with the contractor down from their price, and they actually did it, right? So making smart decisions, RETScreen is a tool that can rapidly help you to do that. So there's the results of that, right? So it was an 8.6 year simple payback, right? But when you think about it, if that roof's going to last for 20 years, why don't we do it then, right? Why don't we do it? And if you know what you're going to save, maybe you could bargain or maybe negotiate a little more aggressively too, knowing that even if you don't make your goals in the negotiation, you still have a reasonably good project. All right, maybe you want to change a rooftop unit on the east wing of the offices in a particular clinic, right, to a heat pump, an air source heat pump for natural gas. RETScreen has the tools for being able to do that. There's actually 2 ways to do that in RETScreen. You can do it as part of what we call the energy feasibility models, and you can model a hybrid system, which goes from natural gas to electric heat pump as the base load and peaking with natural gas. So that way you can take advantage of the fact that most of the year the heat pump will meet the load, right, at very low emissions, depending on, again, where you are in the country. And for those peak times, that natural gas system comes back in. And what we see often when we do this in what we call the power heating cooling tool, which is actually where we can assess the actual loads, we can actually find that the heat pump system can meet 90 to 95% of the load, right? Which means 90 to 95% of the carbon reduction. And that 5%, right, which is a very short period of time that the gas has to kick in, is not a big giveaway. So you're getting a huge chunk of energy and carbon reduction, right, for maybe a more modestly sized heat pump, which doesn't have to meet those peaks. So great tools for sizing and estimating the outcomes of doing heat pump conversions. If you want to look at variable speed drives, I love these, right? I always say in a hospital, take me to your least efficient or reliable pump. I remember one situation we ran into this where pumps were being throttled, right? And variable frequency drives on pumps appropriately applied attract good incentives. They really do across the country. And they produce pretty significant energy savings and reliability improvements for those pumps, right? Because you're no longer throttling them. less wear and tear on the pump. RETScreen has the tools to do that, whether it be on a pump or even for a fan, a little more complex than a pump, but the tools are there. Pump is pretty straightforward. With a fan, it depends on the type of fan blade that you have and how you're actually dampering or restricting it. With a pump is a pump, and basically you throttle it or you don't. Whereas in a case of a fan, it gets a bit more complicated. But RETScreen has the tools to do that, and videos to take you through both those examples quite nicely. In any good energy audit, you also want to know where all the energy is going, to understand where to put your emphasis when it comes to actually improving things. RETScreen provides you this. Once you build out your base case building in the feasibility analysis, then you get a nice pie chart which shows you where all the energy is going. In fact, you can get one for the fuel saved, the proposed case. So it allows you to communicate the results of your work effectively. And I always say, if you're a technical person, you use RETScreen, you may not be the next person who's going to open up this file in this building. Maybe you're going to pass it on to another person. Well, RETScreen has lots of places where you can make notes. You can create a lot of documentation around the building. If you open up the archetypes, they've used those notes pages, picture pages, diagrams, things like that to document their file. You can do the same thing. So it's not just a technical tool for calculations. It's also a good project management tool. Allows you to capture all the relevant information. And then you can start to look at the opportunities. You can see the impact of each individual opportunity here. Now, we do assess this with simple payback, but once you've picked a basket of opportunities you like, because you can turn on and off different measures in the building, then you can take your basket of opportunities forward to the full financial analysis and looking at overall impact on carbon reduction, right? And then we get our financial analysis in detail. So it's kind of a step-by-step process. But there's a little graphic in RETScreen somewhere which shows you what that process is. But it's pretty logical. You simply follow the toolbar across the top of the software, in fact, and it will lead you through that. All right. Can you import building elements? There are tools for importing building elements in from other inventory programs. And you input real measurements. There is a way to import real-time data into RETScreen. You can add any measurement into these fields. So whether you come up with a number by looking at it or by measuring, you can put that in there. And you input as your input for systems. Yeah. So you can't connect meters to the feasibility tools, but there is a way. I'll show you this in a few minutes. There is a way to bring real-time data from even basic meters online right into the tool. I actually use the tool to monitor my own house, for that matter. I've got a thing called an hydro monitor on my service entrance, and hydro has an API that RETScreen connects to. I can pull the data from that into RETScreen and then view it in RETScreen and do my further analysis there. Has the tool been validated against further measurements? Yeah, actually it has. There's a tool there's a test. It's called Building Energy Simulation Test, BEST test. And they have sort of standard building specifications that you throw at a simulation tool, a modeling tool. Again, this is a modeling tool, not a simulation tool, but it actually stands up very well, right? So for more information on that one, you could reach out to RETScreen and they could give you an idea. I know there's a published result on that somewhere. I just couldn't put my finger on it right now. My email is in the last slide here. If there's any residual questions or clarification beyond the answers that I give, use the email on the last slide. It says the help desk, and I mean that. I want to help you get the answers, understand whether this is the tool that works for you. It's not for everything, but I will do my best to get you that information, even beyond today's webinar. All right, modeling renewables. RETScreen does that too, right? So I always like to focus on waste and efficiency first. Energy we don't need to use, get those schedules tightened up, efficiency, get those systems working efficiently as possible, right? But then we have to start thinking about the supply side of things, the renewables, right? So RETScreen works well, or has a great tool for building an embedded photovoltaic system. I've just pulled some examples here, just for sort of visual examples. And again, you don't have to model the entire building to do this. You can basically just input the overall consumption for the building now, the demand and the energy, and then build your embedded system against that. The results, again, we can spec the system. There's an example of the actual embedded photovoltaic system model within RETScreen that does take into account specific components. So in here, we can go, if these solar panels here are actually a particular type, we can go and pull those from the product database and get the costing, but also the specification of performance of those tools too. It's all built in. With a little bit of information, I always joke, you can use Google Earth to actually do an energy audit, and it's not far from the truth. We've done that in a few cases where we weren't able to go to a site, We work with somebody from the site. We looked at the building. It's amazing what you can do with this tool. And the principle of any good energy audit is to reconcile back to your historical consumption. So once you've done that, once you've built a model that matches your historical consumption, then you can start to play with this what if stuff. Solar panels, solar air heaters. There's an example from Flin Flon, right? Brick or the outside of the hospital was failing, aging, so it had to be reclad. Why not put a solar wall on the outside? Then you think, wow, that's a long way north. But you know what? The sun in the winter is much more horizontal to the horizon the further north you go in the world. So that actually makes for very good conditions for collecting heat behind a solar wall and then using that to offset the makeup air that you have to bring in. And in a hospital healthcare environment, you've got a lot of makeup air to deal with. So there's a great way to offset some of that heating of makeup air. Again, the model's all there, takes into account a lot of real situations from the actual or real data from the particular equipment. And you can pull up standard piece of equipment. Even you can specify the color. If that was a green wall, you could specify green and it would change the performance characteristic of that. And you can deal with the operating schedule throughout the year and what is the fuel that you're actually displacing. In that case, they had both number 2 and natural gas boilers. That would displace 59 tons of CO2 if you're heating with number 2 oil, or 40 tons of CO2 with natural gas boilers. That's just a reflection of the carbon associated with those different fuels. Geothermal, right? Digging into the ground and getting heat. Now, the case study I've highlighted here, it's interesting one to have a look at if you have a chance afterwards. You will get the slides, the links will be active. Have a look at this, because what's important here is that digging into the ground and getting heat is a good thing, they say, but it's much cheaper to recover internal heat first versus digging into the ground. So what they did was that they did both, right? But they took advantage of as much heat recovery within the hospital from the conventional systems to reduce the loads, right, before they actually did the heat pump. So basically, you're building out, in a sense, a hybrid system again. You're using all of your resources and using RETScreen as a tool to be able to do that. So that's modeled in there. You can have a look at that quite nicely. Again, there's archetypes, case studies around all of these types of systems. All right, that's feasibility. What if I change this to that? Well, what if I've changed this to that? How do we know how it's improved? For this, we use what we call performance analysis. So performance analysis is essentially taking data, whether it be historical data or real-time data coming in, and actually analyzing it in a way that you really understand how your performance is changing. REDScreen has 2 very powerful tools in its performance tool set. One's called regression, and you've probably all heard, that's a fancy name, but what it means, you remember back in school you did y equals mx plus b, a line, straight line relating, a y variable to an x variable. Well, in building science, turns out there in almost every case is a linear relationship between the energy required and the outside conditions. So basically, REDScreen allows you to create these models, these statistical models, which are fairly basic, y equals mx plus b, predict how much energy you would use, compare it to what you actually did use, and you do a sum of the difference. And call it a fancy word, it's called a Q sum, but it tells a story about what's changed in a building, right? And I want to stress the fact that consumption is not performance. Consumption is simply what you use. Performance is consumption with consideration of the influencers. So again, consumption of energy on the y-axis, right? The weather on the x-axis, y equals mx plus b, that's a performance relationship. And every building needs one of these, right? If you haven't done this, I don't care. Go out and buy a spreadsheet. If you don't want to buy a REDScreen, I can give you a spreadsheet that I built probably 25 years ago that does this in a spreadsheet. Send me an email. I'll send you the spreadsheet along with a 6-page quick help guide. You can run a QSUM in your hospital. I know that was hospital in Hamilton for years and years and years. The energy person there used my spreadsheet. And he used it for over 10 years. And I know he did because every year he needed another year added to it. So eventually I just made it really long. But I know he used that and it works, right? If you're only tracking, say, gas versus heating degrees, it works. You generate a QSUM and your QSUM tells a story of what's happening, whether you're holding the performance or whether it's getting worse. So you don't even have to use REDScreen. Send me an email and I will send you a copy of that tool. It's free. It's been out there for probably 25 years now, and it does work. All right, why monitor? Well, it allows you to see the performance improvement, right? It allows you to see when things go wrong. This is a QSUM. It was a really interesting one. This was from a healthcare facility. And basically they were tracking the economizer that was installed at this point in time. So our QSUM line's tracking along horizontal, nothing's changed. All of a sudden the economizer's changed and it heads downwards. But then it goes horizontal. And they didn't really realize this until later on. But what happened was that a year into the life of that economizer, recovering heat from the flue of the boiler, they realized in this hospital that they'd taken it out of service to maintain it, put it back in service, and forgot to turn the valve which allow the water to flow through the economizer. They lost their savings for 2 months, but then it was caught, and then the savings continued downwards. Now, eventually it gets bumpy. You got to ask yourself, what's changing down here? Whenever the slope of a QSUM changes, something has changed. If it goes up, it's bad. If it goes down, it's good. Well, this piece here is bad. It's actually going up, because if you're trending along here, that's actually equivalent to an upturn, right? Because you're going back to your baseline condition, which is not what you want. You're not getting any savings. So very useful tool in spotting changes in performance. RETScreen has the tools to do that, right? You can go from a data set, which you can import actually electronically from Portfolio Manager. You can import it from a spreadsheet. You can hand it in manual if you want, right? I know Service New Brunswick, Cape Butler and company down there, they use RETScreen on the hospitals. They use Portfolio Manager that collects the data. They fire that over. Brent with the hospital sector fires it over into RETScreen and does the more detailed analysis in RETScreen. Generates this regression line, this y equals mx plus b, the physical linear relationship between gas and gas and heating degree days, or electricity and cooling degree days, and then the QSUM curve, which tells a story of what's changing in that building. This was a lighting retrofit that was done in a building. Now, RETScreen goes well beyond just being able to put things in by hand, because in fact, you can pull data from a number of different electronic sources, right? Some of the metering systems that are out there, not all of them showed here. There's the one I use, Hydro Meter Connects. This is the Schneider metering system here. You might have data in a SQL Server somewhere. You can pull it directly out. You can pull it via green button from your utilities. And you not only can pull monthly or daily or hourly, you can pull data minute by minute, right? Or typically electricity data is 15 minute by 15 minute. But what's shown behind here is my house. This is the data coming from my house via the Hydro API, Application Program Interface, into RETScreen. So you got a really powerful tool for being able to get data into RETScreen, and then analyze it. Here I've overlaid the hourly temperature on this graph to see what impact, if there is any relationship between my hourly electricity consumption and my hourly temperature. Nice visualization tools. I like to look week over week. My favorite graph is the weekly graph, because I can put a week, this is electricity consumption on a weekly basis, right? Here's my temperature on a weekly basis. I can look at it week by week. Well, this is also a week too, right? But then this is a heat map. So every row in this is a week. And then so you got 52 weeks in the year. So you can see this, you can see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So this one actually, so Monday to Sunday. So you can visualize what's happening in that building quite quickly, right? So very, very good tools for being able to visualize and use this information. We did a webinar recently. We were working with a municipality which had a clinic, a large regional healthcare clinic, and we produced these graphs. And there was anomalies, weird things happening in these graphs. The gentleman that was in the session took the graph, took a screenshot of what I'd created, because I'd used his data to create it. He went back to a facilities meeting a little while later to find out what was going on. And yeah, the results were interesting and not completely resolved yet. But the point is, this type of information can drive opportunities, because if there's anomalies, you got to explain them. And sometimes when you explain them, they don't make there's a peak demand in a building towards the end of the day, right? Here's another example. This is a compressor system, basically a multi-stage chiller that was cycling very, very heavily, right? That's not good for the equipment, right? Not good for the equipment. So the chiller wasn't staging properly. Here's an example where you had electric heat, electric cooling in a building, and when they put the building on a summer day into setback towards the end of the day in the office area of the building, what happened was the electric heat kicked in to raise the temperature to the new set point. Not what you want. Simultaneous heating and cooling. I've never seen one quite as amazing as that, but it was a huge opportunity. That actually drove them to using some AI to keep tabs on those systems, because it had happened before and they didn't realize it came back. RETScreen, 10 minutes with the data, you're able to identify that opportunity very quickly. And if you're looking at conversion, electrification, understanding your hourly consumption of gas speaks a lot to your hourly loads in your system, which is what you're going to need to size that new electrified heating. RETScreen can deal with the hourly gas interval data as well. Thanks. Okay. Oh, great. So, yeah, Giselle, I'll send you the Excel file. Can you import those base buildings data into RETScreen from other modeling programs? No, no, you can't do that per se, but you can bring in some of the data for the buildings into RETScreen. Yeah, there's the heat map for gas. So that shows you, these are your peak times. Remember I said that the peak times are only a short period of time. So do you size for this up here, or do you size somewhere down here? Sorry, or do you size somewhere down here, right? And your heat pump deals with 95% of the energy, and those peaks are met with the gas, and you then have a much more modestly sized heat pump. So using these tools, you can very quickly visualize and get an idea of what the opportunity is there. All right, so we're going to move on to portfolio analysis. We're going to look at sort of a whole collection of buildings. And the portfolio view is pretty simple. Every one of these lines is a different facility, right? So but it could be a different department in your facility. If you have sub-metering within your facility, you could actually break it up that way and have a separate file for each department in the facility. And then you can filter and pick and choose, create groups and different things for reporting purposes. You can very quickly do benchmarking. I love this graph. This is a benchmarking graph. And on the x-axis here, we have facility size. Here we have greenhouse gas emissions, or tons of CO2. All right, so every dot is the base case for one of my buildings. Every hollow dot is the proposed case. So what we've done is we looked at across the portfolio, where the building is today, where it could be the proposed case. We've determined what the CO2 emissions are, right? And we put that on a graph. So this is a relative measure, right? Tons of CO2 per meter squared, a floor area. So that's the benchmark line. Any building that's above the benchmark to begin with, or any section of a building, it comes in as red. Anyone that starts out below is green, but it allows you to see, how effective your projects can be. You can report on a whole portfolio of projects this way. The custom dashboard tool got some really interesting pictures here. I showed you very quickly earlier how to create the custom dashboard itself. You go in there and you pick and choose the different information, drop it on the canvas, but they can become very, very powerful and informative graphs. I mean, that's the kind of thing. They even have a kiosk feature in here where, just think about the elevator in a building you've often seen has the financial reports. Well, why don't you have a monitor somewhere that has the reports on the sustainability or the efficiency of your hospital and how much carbon is being reduced? Have these kinds of status screens come up. That's the way it's designed. RETScreen has a full screen kiosk tool feature built around the custom dashboard. Really useful for spreading this information far and wide. Now, Portfolio Manager. There's a bit of doubt out there. There's a bit of uncertainty about what's going on with Portfolio Manager right now because of things south of the border. But RETScreen has two ways to get your data out of Portfolio Manager. One is with a spreadsheet, and one is with what's called an application program interface. And that actually comes with an automatic update. So every time you go into your portfolio, it'll go out and pull the most recent data from Portfolio Manager. Once you've got your portfolio, you can take the reporting, you can go well beyond the reporting. Even today with portfolio, the reporting you have there, you can go well beyond that with the dashboards in RETScreen. So pull your data in. If you've got a Portfolio Manager portfolio, apply for basically what's called the application program interface. If you send me an email, or maybe Autumn, we can send out a little bit of an email around this one, how to do this. But basically, you go into Portfolio Manager, you say, I want to use the API. I'm going to use it with RETScreen. They may come back and ask you a couple more questions, and they say, okay, your account's certified for that. And now you can click a button basically and pull your data over and play with your heart's content. And then you can go on to do feasibility analysis on those buildings. So you're making RETScreen now sort of the hub in that sense. I'm going to show you an even more powerful. Now, Portfolio Manager can pull data from the invoice. This is what I would say. Use Portfolio Manager to clean up your data, get that into RETScreen, and go from there. Can RETScreen be used to calculate Scope 1 and Scope 2 inventory? Yeah, so you can do Scope 1 and Scope 2 here by inputting, months of electricity, fuel. Yeah, so RETScreen, in fact, I didn't show the detailed views, but in the summary view, it brings all of the Scope 1 and Scope 2 to a combined number of greenhouse gas emissions. So it actually goes beyond well beyond the granularity of portfolio manager. It deals with the time varying, say, carbon associated with the electricity grid as well. Absolutely, yes. And again, feel free to send me an email afterwards with any of these for more clarification. I'm more than happy to even do a quick little meeting on Teams or Zoom or whatever, where we can go into more depth. So my goal today, not just to present this information, but then to give you an opportunity for, to go well beyond this, to pick up this tool, use it, and if I can help you do that, that's really what I'm about. So actually getting data from Portfolio Manager is as simple as a couple of quick clicks. So in Portfolio Manager, you may actually have username and password. This is the sample we set up a little while ago, right? You tell it where you want to put it and you click OK, and it chunks and chunks away and it builds a portfolio. And then you click a button which is update data and you say auto update. So I can set the auto update for once a day, once an hour, once every 10 minutes. So it'll go out to Portfolio Manager. Even though you're adding data in over here, it's going to bring that into RETScreen and update your portfolio and update all your graphs automatically. Very, very powerful tool, right? Even without uncertainty at Portfolio Manager's end, there's still a lot of value in using Portfolio Manager and RETScreen together. I always tell people use the best of both, and that really is the partnership between these two tools. And then, excuse me, you can actually generate this graph relatively quickly after doing an import from Portfolio Manager as well. That's my favorite graph, right? It's the benchmarking graph. In this case, it's fuel consumption. You could be greenhouse gas emissions because RETScreen will deal interchangeably with those things simply by applying the correct factors, excuse me, that are all built into the tool. It's very adept at dealing with these things. How does RETScreen compare to other energy modeling software? Well, I'll be very honest. RETScreen is not an hourly simulation. So your eCast, CanQuest, Energy Plus, all those tools are hourly simulation tools. They require a lot of skill, a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of time to use them. RETScreen typically is either a monthly or an annual calculation. So that's why I use the tool model. But the term model, right, is not a simulation tool, but it does compare very well to those tools, as I mentioned before, with the best tests. But there are going to be places where you may not be able to use it. For example, if you're applying for money from some organizations and they require a simulation, and they require an hourly simulation, RETScreen does not meet that criteria. Now, some of those organizations are starting to consider RETScreen as a tool, but that's a bridge that you have to cross when you get there. All right, go a little further here. Another, picture, some of the dashboard views. I mean, this is, what is this? 7 different buildings all stacked up year over year in terms of the performance of those buildings. So I mean, the dashboard reporting tools, honestly, I mean, just go and look at some of the samples in RETScreen. If you want to have a look at those things, I'll just show you where to go. If you go into my portfolio here, there's a bunch of samples in here, and they are beautifully colorful. This also shows all the other software that RETScreen will interface to as well. These are all commercial softwares beyond Portfolio Manager. So, and then some of the actually direct connect tools for pulling the data in directly to Portfolio Manager. Sorry, into RETScreen. Now, the Net Zero Planner. What is the Net Zero Planner? The Net Zero Planner is a tool that uses the archetypes and allows you to sort of give it sort of direction in 10 different areas to set up a portfolio. I mean, there's a great video on this, so I would not even do it justice in the next 2 or 3 minutes that I have left here to do this. To go through it, but have a look at this video because it talks about how to use that. So if you have 2 or 3 or even just one facility, it'll go through and it'll basically apply a strategy, which is, where do you start in terms of emissions? What's your baseline energy? What do you anticipate as a cleaner grid? Are you going to be disposing of any facilities? What energy efficiency measures are you putting in place? Right? What strategies are you going to take when it comes to electrification and heating? How are you going to apply on-site renewables? How much of the roof area, ground mount, and so on? What off-site renewables could you purchase? So contracts for green energy. What carbon offsets could you use, right? And then what financial analysis do you want to apply to this? And what it will do then is it will go through systematically apply those, and develop for you, either for one building or a whole portfolio of buildings, a strategy and a result. So it shows here that, okay, here's our reference period, here's our baseline year 2012, right? The cleaner grid is going to have some impact over time, right? Energy efficiency measures, waste and efficiency first before renewables is always my mantra. Energy efficiency measures takes a big chunk, like this waterfall diagram. Electrification of heating, right? This is on-site renewables, this is off-site renewables, then in carbon offsets. So how to get to net zero, those are your different steps, and then you can see the relative contribution of each one of those based on the questions that you answered earlier. These are built around either a particular building that you can start with or the archetypes that are in RETScreen. So a great way to start to visualize what the future could look like. Getting to net zero is not going to happen overnight. We need to think about the pathway there and understand, I think, to understand the importance of efficiency or waste and efficiency reduction in addition to electrification and renewables, right? And it's interesting, I've seen some jurisdiction recently are pulling back incentives around these things and pushing more incentives towards these things. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. So waste, efficiency, and then supply. That's my mantra. All right. So in summary, all-in-one project tool. Everything's there you need as an energy practitioner. And it's even useful for those that aren't energy practitioners to go in and look at some of this stuff. Like I said, you could download it. You don't have to buy it. You have access to a lot of the features that are in there. Have a look at them. This is the busy diagram. But this really, to me, represents what RETScreen is capable of. RETScreen at the center here, it can pull data from Portfolio Manager. It has access to hourly weather data, right? It can create its own portfolios. Those portfolios could come, our information could come in those portfolios from many, many other sources. Real-time data from meters can come into RETScreen. It can produce these great time series analytics where we're looking at the real-time data. It can do the what-if analysis. It can do the statistical performance analysis, and it can do that portfolio reporting as a dashboard. So RETScreen can be sort of the heart of your energy management toolkit in so many different ways. And as time moves on, RETScreen has demonstrated to me anyway that they are committed to making more and more connections with other tools out there. So where RETScreen can't do it, they're not going to try to invent it. They're going to leverage what exists and work harmoniously in this framework. So have a look at it. It's a powerful tool. It'll simplify your life. Things like having all the databases there when you want to do a simple what if, right? Standardization, all the factors. So somebody asked about the factors, the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and so on. Those factors are all built in here. So, and even if I know people that ask their vendors to make proposals in RETScreen because it kind of normalizes the presentation. The assumptions become more uniform, more standardized. It's got persuasive tools. There's no doubt about that. To me, the QSUM from an analytic perspective is one of the most persuasive tools. Other people have other ideas, but good graphics, great ways to demonstrate the value of anything you do, including NPV/RR, benefit to cost ratio. Energy efficiency is not a cost. It's an investment in the future. And RETScreen allows us to demonstrate the value of those investments, both from a financial, but also from a sustainability perspective. It's a great persuasive tool, and it's interoperable, as I've said many, many times today. It works with a lot of other different softwares, and it works quite nicely. I didn't mention that even if you don't use with Portfolio Manager, even if you don't use the API, you can simply export your whole portfolio to a spreadsheet and bring it into RETScreen. So there is ways to do that relatively easily without even doing the automatic links. You will get a 30-day license as of, I think, Autumn, you're going to apply for this and send the licenses out to everybody from RETScreen. You can download at www.retscreen.net. And the help desk is now open, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. I want to hear about your challenges. I want to hear about your situations. The quid pro quo is I learn from what your challenges are, how you want to apply it. If I can come up with a solution for you, I learn, you learn, we all gain. Autumn, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. That was fantastic. And look at that. We got 5 minutes to spare here. Sorry, crazy dogs. I think
I got some of those.
right. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so I believe you answered most questions as you went through the presentation, right?
I think so. Yeah. If anybody has a question that I didn't speak to properly. Sometimes I have a hard time seeing them. Right? That's what happens when you get older.
Yeah.
Not all my monitors are the same size.
Obviously, also the chat and the Q&A,
Yeah,
lots
I
going
got them both
on.
up here. Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, great.
So,
Um,
but again, I encourage people to use the email. And I genuinely want, I'll take the time. We can have a phone call. We can do a little Teams meeting, and I can explore any one of those questions. If the organization does not have an energy manager, here we got a couple more. Who is the ideal REDScreen user? Someone in facilities or maintenance? Well, REDScreen requires three things. It requires comfort with software. It requires some knowledge of energy, obviously, right? So it's not gonna make you comfortable. You got to be comfortable with software. It's not going to give you the energy knowledge. But if you're like a facilities person, you have a lot of equipment knowledge, and that's actually really useful in REDScreen. And then time, right? It takes a bit of time. One of the things I say is hire yourself a co-op student, maybe an engineering student out of a technical college or a university, and have them work with you, right? And see what REDScreen can do for you, right? So can you uh, provide a demo on the autumn? Actually, I can send you a link. I can send a link. So maybe Autumn will send a link to a video on the automated energy connection using the spreadsheet. Actually, I can probably bring that up right now quickly. I know we have to jump here pretty quickly, but if you've got data in Portfolio Manager, what you do is you go to Portfolio Manager. Let's just see if I can pull this off here. So I'm going to open up Portfolio Manager. And so you go into Portfolio Manager and you sign in, and you go down to on the first page, the main page, there's a thing you download your entire portfolio to Excel right there. Okay, you click that, and eventually it's going to download a file. You go over to Portfolio Manager and you go in here on Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and you click that, and it's going to ask you for where that file is on your computer. There, I did it. That was the last time I demoed it. You create a new destination, and Bob's your uncle or Mary's your aunt. It's going to be there. Okay, that's a 30-second demonstration.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can definitely send. I heard you say lots of things. Autumn's sending this and that, so we'll connect and make
Yeah,
sure
there's
we
a
get some
video
data.
on how to do those connections too. So
Perfect.
yeah.
Okay, I think we got one more question from Caroline, just asking how much time per week would it be needed to adopt use of RETScreen effectively?
Oh,
And
that's a good question. Yeah, you have to use it. I think what I like about your question is it's per week. That means you're going to do it every week. Because the one thing I find that many people tell me is if I don't use it for 6 months, I forget most of what I knew. It's one of those things that you do have to use it or you lose it. So I would say if you could even give it like 4 or 5 hours a week, right? If you could do that, I mean, a day is ideal, but that's going to be tough. Maybe half a day per week and do that on a regular basis. Have a strategy, and I'd be happy um, to actually, or who asked the question? Carol, I'd be happy to we interact by email. I can kind of give you a strategy, knowing once you describe your situation, I can kind of give you how I would start, what I would do, and then you can kind of pace your way through that week. So, but you're going to get 30 days of the license for sure. And then you have to make a decision beyond that.
awesome. Well, thank you, Stephen. Like he said, he's available for questions. Shoot him an email, and yeah, I'll be sending out all the resources, recording links, all that good stuff, probably next week. So thank you everyone for joining. We got to hop over to another call. Thank you, Stephen. I'll see you in a minute.
Thank you. Take
Okay,
care.
bye everyone.